Hey guys, this is Neil Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com, and I'm here reviewing a video which I played on Merge Network just a couple days ago at 25 no limit. At this point in the session, I'd probably played about 10 hands on every table. Didn't really have too much of a read on anyone. I've been playing these stakes on Merge Network for a few weeks now, so I have a few notes on some players, whether they're over here. My little red note says he's a bit on the looser aggressive side. These white little sunglasses are more tight aggressive player. But I don't really have any specific reads on any of these opponents at these tables just yet. I recorded about an hour here. There were a bunch of interesting hands at the beginning of the session, so hopefully that'll be worth reviewing coming up, and we'll see. Maybe I'll turn them into a 2 or 3-part series, and review, even though it was a bit slower in the later part of the series, or later part of the session. Still some spots going over. Here on table 1, I just pause it for a second. I free bet with the ace-9 suited. Calling certainly an option as well. We see my opponent over here is pretty tight, but even against a tight player opening on the button, he is going to be, have a pretty wide range and be folding to that free bet a lot. It's a bit marginal just calling, playing it out of position without any read on your opponent. I decided to just free bet and take it down right there. On table 3 right now, I believe I just folded this king-jack. I didn't have much of a read on this opponent. I knew he was a bit loose, but not very aggressive pre-flop. And like I said, I assumed well, pause it for a second. I assume the small blind right now was a loose aggressive player, like I said from previous sessions, even though he doesn't play all that loose aggressively right now, this session as I remember, but I certainly know he's capable of free betting, and so is the big blinds. And when I just call here, given these stack sizes, I'm really telling the blinds that I have a marginal hand, and I'm not looking to get all in with Brittany pre-flop. So instead of unleashing such like an obvious profitable free betting situation against my opponents, I decided to just fold. Clearly, when I'm calling there, also I'm not gonna have much room to play post flop. If I do flop a king or a jack, obviously I'm gonna go with it. But if my opponent gets all in, there's a decent chance he'll have a better king or a better jack. And obviously, if I don't hit the flop, there's no room to float or bluff raise or anything like that. He's gonna be almost all in already. So if really no post-flop playability, and pre-flop being a bit marginal, I have to just fold, even though, if we're deeper stacked. Obviously, free betting or calling are both good options. And on table 1, since I had just free bet my opponent with the ace-9 suited, I decided not to kind of keep going at him with the queen 10. Definitely a hand I consider a bit too weak to just call and take a flop with. Again, with a few somewhat aggressive blinds. Certainly a hand's bend, which a free bet bluff would have been a possibility. So for this session, I was trying to do a few things. I mean, I was basically playing my normal game, but I was trying to play a bit more aggressively, actually both from the blinds and from the button. So not quite both out of position and position. From early position, as far as under the gun +1, I was still playing pretty tight. But I was trying to steal a bit more from the small blinds, which when it comes up, we'll see. Nothing crazy, but more or less all playable hands. Something like an 8-9 offsuit, or I don't know, King 2 suited, which maybe I'm folding a bit more often. If it's Jack 8, I have a feeling I'll open if it's folded to me. Hands along those lines, I'm trying to be opening a lot more from the small blinds, particularly against opponents who aren't fighting back. Whereas in the past, I've been a bit more passive from a small blind. It's partially due to these stakes, due to the whole Black Friday type thing. A lot of my bankroll is still wrapped up on full tilt. So, I really am trying to grind out these stakes and build up a bankroll like this. And players aren't as aggressive, so you can get away from stealing from a small blind. So it has to do with that a bit, and also it is a part of my game which I'm working on being a bit more aggressive, even from it's not exactly the best spot to be adding a ton of aggression to your game. The small blind when you're out of position, but it's certainly a spot which I was playing a bit too passively. Another spot which I also, always play aggressively is blind versus blind in position. I think this is the second time in a row my opponent opened. He's already got playing 31-31 over here. He seems to be very loose and aggressive. I really do like to play back at these guys as early as possible. I may have mentioned this in a previous video, but if you set the precedent that you're just going to keep folding every time they open, I find that if you 3-bet roughly, the third or fourth or fifth time, right in that kind of mid-range, it very much looks like you're playing back and getting fed up. Whereas if you 3-bet them the first or second time, it's a bit more, a bit more ambiguous, whether you actually woke up with the hands or whether you are kind of taking a stand. So I do decide to 3-bet with my 10-8 here, flop absolutely nothing. All I could really do is c-bet this flop. There are still quite a few hands which will fold, something like an ace-jack or an ace-queen. Remember, we are blind versus blind. He could be defending, somewhat loosely there. If the problem with that is if he is defending loosely, he might have something like a queen-jack, queen-10, certainly king-jack type hands. A lot of, those middle Broadway hands which either have a straight draw or top pair, which may play back at me somehow. But like I said, smaller to middle pocket pairs, a lot of them are finding a fold right here, as well as, the ace jack, ace queen. So I decided to just fire once and basically be done with it. As we'll see in a second, my opponent does check min raise. I don't think this line makes any sense for really anything he can have. Given that this board is pretty drawing connecting, like I said, I think it's, very easy for me to have those same similar type hands. Like I just mentioned, my opponent, can possibly have like a Jack 10 or something. It's unlikely he's going to call a 3-bet out of position with it. It's just that since he's a bit of a looser opponent, I have to realize that it's possible. Whereas with me in position 3-betting, I could certainly be 3-betting a Jack 10 offsuit, turning it into a bluff. It's not all that out of the ordinary. So the point being that I have a lot of hands which have at least something on this flop, whether that's as small as an inside straight draw, or certainly a pair of kings or a flush draw, or better. There's, I'm not. I guess King 9 is certainly a hand which I would possibly 3-bet in position as a bluff. So I was check min raise on such a dry, coordinated board. It doesn't make all that much sense to me. The other thing, obviously, being it's difficult for him to have a very strong hand. Again, a few of the hands which make a bit of sense for me don't make all that much sense for him. If he's calling a 3-bet out of position with twos or pocket kings, he's more likely to fold the twos, 3-bet pocket kings. And even if he did have nines or something, which would be a very strong hand, or really the only very strong hand he could be representing here, he's likely to raise bigger because the board is so drawing connecting. So I thought, basically what I'm trying to say is I thought this check raise was pretty full of shit. I do mess around with my bet sizing and, do I 3-bet to like $11 or something, and but it just makes no sense for my part either to make a minimum re-raise. I just don't have anything. I'm gonna have to go ahead and give it to him and kind of reevaluate my read him as player. Hopefully at some point figure out what he's doing here. Is he just min raising as a pure bluff? I mean, it seems like a weird play, but obviously, like I said, because I'm 3-betting so wide in position, some players, at this point do realize that. Maybe they've watched my videos, maybe they just know it's fairly common to 3-bet in position. So since I have a pretty wide range here, when all my air has to seed bet and there's just nothing it could do against a check min raise, it makes some sense to do this as a bluff, but obviously it would have to be extremely imbalanced. So if I was ever able to find out if this is always a bluff, obviously I could play back at it. Like I said, because I think this is pretty full of shit, there's a decent chance if I had a queen 10 or a queen jack or something, I'd consider playing back. Like, I don't know at this point I'd jam all in, but I'd need at least a bit of something, some way to improve on return to do it. Certainly a flush draw, I would look to play very aggressively, and obviously king I wouldn't be folding. So what I'm trying to say here is with a bit more equity, because his line doesn't make all that much sense, I definitely think this is a spot I could have played back, but with 10 high there's kind of not much I could do about it. So, that's that hand over there. Just to quickly talk about table 2 over here. I just completed with the ace-5 suited. I could have raised, if this player over here is very loose. I guess the big blind was very tight, though. I didn't expect him to, isolate me out of a pot or anything. I opted to just take the flop with the ace-5 suited, flop an inside straight draw, an overcard, backdoor flush draw, good amount of barreling opportunities. The type of board where just not a ton of things are going to call this bet. Obviously, Jack's going to call a flush draw. And a straight draw. But, not a ton of straight draws, obviously. Out here for 2-3, I clearly have to be playing pretty low cards. Impossible, not completely impossible, but extremely unlikely that anyone has 2 overcards, because it would have to be king, queen, or better, and that mostly raises pre-flop. So I definitely spot to lead out and try to pick up the pot, and like I said, barrel some turn cards. Obviously, if I make a straight, an ace, a club, maybe even just a king or a queen as a scare card. It looks like I don't have auto fold off over on table two, and was supposed to hand I was going to open on the button. Like I said, just opening, just a bit wider than usual. Still want to be suited or have some post flop playability or whatever. An interesting dynamic develops over here on table four. We're going to see it start to develop right now. Again, something I've discussed on previous videos. When a weaker opponent just leads out on a very dry flop where it doesn't make a ton of sense for him to really be doing this for value. And the reason being because if he has a queen, or certainly fours or twos, he's gonna want. I'm going to see bet this board with my entire range, so clearly it makes a lot more sense for him to either check call to induce, or check raise to take control of the hand to get him more money, things like that. So leading out is very suspicious to me. So I do raise this bet from a weaker opponent, basically regardless. Against a more straightforward opponent, they're gonna have just more solid reasons for doing this. So we see over here with 8 high. I have no other option. I can't call with 8 high, even with backdoor diamond draw. And I guess 2 overcards for 4. I don't know. I'm starting to be very optimistic about my hand if I'm calling there. So I certainly want to raise and try to pick it up. And it does work the first time, but we'll see we get into a bit of dynamic of that happening. I don't know, I want to say, I guess, a bit too much. Maybe I got a bit out of line against him. But we'll see that coming up. Seems like this network also is a bit slower than full tilt. I'm not sure if I just don't have any hands, or I don't know. I just believe a few of your other sites, maybe the software was a bit faster. Um, I don't remember this ace's hand. I have a feeling it'll just get folded around. No, it doesn't. Okay, now I do remember this a bit better. So yeah, this opponent was playing very loose and aggressive, free betting a lot. So I decided to make my 4-bet sizing just to. Oh, this okay. I do remember this hand now. Actually, we get stacks in. So the exact opposite of what I said. So yeah, this opponent had been playing a ton of hands. I've never discussed my HUD because it's all jumbled, and to be honest, I don't use it all that much myself. But I just like having it there just in case. So I'll just quickly say the first 2 numbers on the top left column are VPIP and pre-flop raise. This is a video, so I'm actually not able to highlight anything. But those 2 numbers are certainly VPIP and pre-flop raise. And the number right below it on the second line, first number, is free bet percentage. So somehow he has 100% free bet percentage. I'm assuming he only played like 4 hands at this table or something and free bet once before. I didn't even see it. I remember just vaguely seeing him all in a minute ago with like an ace jack versus an ace queen. I guess he had to have had the winning end of it because he has a bit more money than usual. But I didn't see the hand either at the time or actually just missed it now again. I kind of just saw the tail end of it. The point being, I have reason to believe he's a bit of a weaker opponent, just, betting and raising more or less everything. A maniac type opponent. So I do make my 4-bet sizing just a bit bigger than usual. I guess also because it's such a small re-raise, there's reason for it also. I don't remember my exact sizing. I remember at the time I wanted to make it a bit bigger than usual, and actually, I didn't make it all that big at all, really. It looks like it was, just over just about 2.5 times. I think I could have even added an extra blind or 2. Generally speaking, when these guys free bet, they're not looking to fold unless, I made it 10 or something. Maybe he folds. So I think I could get away with making it maybe just above 3 times his raise, some of them more like 6.25, instead of like I did 550, like, 2.3 or so of his raise. Generally speaking, with 4-bet sizings, there's no reason to make them all that much bigger than about 2.5 times your opponent's raise, 100 big blinds deep, just because most opponents are either 4-betting or folding anyway at that point. So no reason to put any more money in. But against these weaker opponents, particularly with the hands where you want to get a bunch of money in pre-flop, obviously, because it's the nuts, certainly feel free to raise a bit bigger, play exploitably, tip your hands, all things along those lines. It doesn't matter all that much, assuming that it's just kind of a weaker opponent. So here we get a king-9 for flop. Obviously great flop for my hands. I have ace-king drawing, almost dead, 2 outs. And, if he has a pocket pair, again, 2 outs. And very unlikely that he has me beat. Clearly, kings are very likely to 4-bet pre-flop. Or I guess that would be 5-bet pre-flop. And, yeah, I guess he could have 9s or 4s, but no big deal. If he does, I'm gonna lose the buy-in. Just as simple as that. So I also have the ace of diamonds. So because I have the ace of diamonds, I definitely feel I have the option of just calling here and allowing him to continue bluffing. But I didn't quite want to give a free card, and yeah, he could still have a diamond draw. He could still have an inside straight draw. Obviously, a king's not folding, and I'm not quite sure how much money I'm gonna get out of pure bluffs on the turn and river. So instead of just calling here, I don't think there's any reason to jam it all in. Although it's not a ridiculous play or anything. Oh, I guess actually I will talk about that as far as jamming all in here versus making some sort of a smaller raise, because it is something which a lot of players at smaller stakes do make the mistake of, and you should often be looking to make the smaller bet size as opposed to a jam all in. So just to go into that a bit deeper, if I do just jam all in on this flop of two aces, I'm really 100% forcing him to have a king or better. If he has better than a king, I'm actually beat. It's extremely unlikely, which is why it's no big deal there. But it's possible. The reason why it's no big deal is because the money's getting it all in anyway. However, I am forcing him to basically have a king if I jam all in. He just can't rebluff me if I'm all in. He needs a very strong hand to call, and I don't want that. I want there to be some way for him to get all in with the hands worse than a king, or worse than a pair, or just as bad as possible. And that way is to either be, like I said, calling here is definitely a fine option. Thinking about it, maybe even because there's so much money in the pot, so much little to get behind, it might even be the better play. But yeah, and like I said before, the 2 points being that there are two diamonds on board, and the king nine, obviously a 10 jack or queen aren't the best cards in the world for my hand. A few hands move ahead, whether it is just pocket tens, jacks, or queens, or certainly the inside straight draws that they hit, or obviously a diamond is not perfectly ideal. He might have some sort of a flush draw. So those are the reasons why I didn't want to give a free card, but those aren't huge parts of his range, which are reasons why it wouldn't be such a bad idea to give a free card. But the point here, which I'm trying to get to, is that just because you don't like calling doesn't mean you automatically have to jam all in. Just because it's basically a 3x raise, I decided to just min raise here. To charge those draws, not let him get a free card, maybe spaz out, jam all in with whatever, and make sure that it's a bit more difficult for him to fold a second pair type hand. So the turn card is kind of a card I don't want to see, the Queen of Diamonds, but I have the diamonds, I have the best hand here, also, in this situation in particular, I have the best hands. I'm just not folding, my last $8 or whatever it is, $9 into about 30 at that point with an overpair and a nut flush draw. It's just way too much equity to fold. I don't want to check behind and let a hand like this get off cheap. I don't know exactly what he's doing here. Obviously, it's a weaker opponent. Calls up his whole stack without a diamond and with two overcards on board. Not a great play. But like I mentioned, if I did jam all in on this flop, there's some chance he finds the fold. Because only a second pair, he puts me on a king or whatever. Whereas if I since I just min-raised, it's a lot easier for him to call a min-raise, and then he feels pot committed on the turn. I don't know his exact thought process, but at least it seems reasonable that that's what it was. On the flop, he just didn't want to fold to a min-raise that could be bluffing or whatever. I don't always have a king, so he decides to call once, and then by the turn, it's $9 more for him to call. He has an inside straight draw, he has a pair of jacks. He decides to go with it. So, the point here being, go ahead and don't be afraid to make the smaller raises and allow your opponents to make some mistakes and call off their money with a lot weaker hands than they might have had you just jammed all in. And oop, I guess that goes to show you what I thought of his play. Obviously, getting all in with jacks on that board is pretty loose. You see, I do as always tag my opponents. Sometimes not very nicely. Over on table 4, I'm going to pre-bet this king 7. It's not a play I really make all that much. Obviously, it's pretty reasonable. It's as I always say, it's a hand with a good amount of equity versus calling range. It has the king, high card value, suited, flush value. This opponent is opening, well, I'll give you the third stat in my, or a few more stats in my head. I guess I do use it a bit. Over here on the bottom left is his attempt to steal blinds percentage. So he is, positionally aware. He's opening in late position just more than twice as often as he does in total. So he's stealing blinds. 37% is a pretty average high amount, I guess I want to call it. The amount should be high, so it's a good thing. And he's folding three bets, which over here I said on the second line, this number 6 is free bet. The number 1 to the right of it is fold to free bet. So he had been folding 100% to free bets. I don't know exactly the sample size there. It probably wasn't more than 5 or 10, but it's certainly something to go by. So like I said, with the king blocker, with the equity, with all that going on here, I decided to just free bet and assume I'm taking it down a lot. Also, it's not a hand at all strong enough to call with. And the final point being, like I said, I wanted to play a bit more aggressive from the blinds and from the button this session. So counts as being a bit more aggressive from the blinds. Over here, I don't know, maybe that is a bit of a bet size until I have to work on or whatever. I just kind of hit the 2/3 button. It's about right for this board. I could certainly get away with even just a bit smaller, but you always want to be careful with those smaller bet sizes when you don't know too much about your opponent. The reasons, obviously, why they're good, why I went over before, it allows your opponents to continue with more weak hands. The reasons why they're a bit, uh, difficult to deal with, or, the thing that makes it a positive also can be a negative about it, because, my opponent might float a board like this a bit more often or whatever, which I'm expecting him to. So, with the King 7, I opted to bet a bit bigger. Will I bet, clearly from a balance perspective, from playing these games a lot, I don't want to, bet a bit bigger when I don't have it and smaller when I do. It just becomes too obvious. But in this spot, it looks like I might have just got a bit sloppy with my bet sizing, and I might actually be doing that here. It would be a bit more optimal to maybe just bet $3 with my entire range on this board. Or it would be a lot more optimal, to be perfectly honest, to bet $3 with my entire range on this board. And this, what you should be looking for is, a consistent bet sizing in your free bet pots, based on board texture. Because this is just a low, uncoordinated board, you should always be betting right around half pot. If it's a more connecting board, you might be betting closer to 2/3 or even closer to full pot. So here we see there's a king on the turn. Again, this is another spot where, do I want to play more, I don't know if I want to use the word optimally, or more balanced is really what I'm looking to say. Do I want to take the more balanced approach here? And, because this king is a great barrel card, and I do want to barrel it a lot, should I feel obligated to bet when I actually hit it? As, against observant opponents, you should feel obligated to bet when you hit it, or else it'll, like I said about the small bet sizing, it'll again become very obvious if when you actually hit the king, you're all of a sudden checking and trying to get to showdown, whereas when you miss it, you bet it as a bluff. So I decided, because, this seems like a reasonable opponent, he should realize that I want to bluff this king a lot, so I could have a pretty wide bluffing range. I'm still, if I'm free betting king 7 suited at a position here, I'm very likely to free betting just a whole bunch of random trash, which I could have right now. So I very much can still be bluffing on this turn, but because I have a pair of kings, it's almost always the best hand. I decided to go ahead and bet for value and hope, the reason why you're bluffing it a lot is because he is folding here a lot. But, and maybe he decides to try to be a bit of a sheriff and call twice with like a pair of 8s or something. So I go for a small value bet. And again, here I go right around half pot. That's all I need. This will work perfectly fine as a bluff. And as we see, it is for value here. I could very comfortably shove the last $13 in on the river and give him another, roughly half pot size bet to consider. I didn't quite see how it worked out. I think I got away with it, but I know at the same time I was talking about that hand. Looks like I am checking the stats on someone. But I'm sorry, on table 2 I opened like a queen 2 suited. Here it looks like I'm opening the 9-10 offsuit. Queen 2 suited from a small blind on table 2, 9-10 offsuit on the button. Again, both hands which are, a bit more borderline for me, but for this session I was certainly trying to open, and I think it all worked out. I didn't even see table 2. If I got free bet, I'm sure I just folded. Here, like I said, this dynamic has started to develop with his opponent. Again, on ace-a2, I guess I'll let it play it out. I think he leads out again for 50 cents. And again, I just had to just take the exact same line. Basically, my thought process very similar to before. There's no reason for him to lead out if he actually has something here. I can't call with 10 high. He's already shown a tendency to bet fold, so all reasons to raise. But one thing I'll add to that is after it happens once already, you are a bit more likely to get played back at, or for him, I guess he's more likely to be doing this for value, or certainly less likely to bluff. If I'm just going to raise in every situation here, he's going to stop bluffing, which is what happens later on. This isn't, this is the second part of our little bit of history. I believe there's about 4 or 5 times where this happens. I think I raised him every time. I got a little over I don't know, overzealous or whatever raising there. But this spot I do raise him again. It doesn't work out just yet. He does call this time, so clearly he has something. Basically 6 diamonds. I figure given our just small bit of previous history, when he does bet call here, I mean, basically he has to have something. Given our history, I think he's more likely to have had something on the flop. Whether that something's an ace, an eight, or a flush draw, it is still now it's an ace, an eight, or a flush. So, it's a difficult range to barrel him off. I guess an eight would fold, but yeah, it's a bit optimistic. Maybe he's not looking to fold that, and obviously he can have a diamond with it. Something like 8-9 with a 9 of diamonds isn't folding. So I'm basically done with this hand. Obviously, I picked up an inside straight draw. I hit my straight. I checked behind to see my bit of equity, and it looks like I consider barreling it, but I don't think I have enough equity to really barrel there. I'd rather just try to hit a 7, which I do. If my opponent had made a big bet on this river, I don't think I'd raise it. He has flushes in his range. Also, given that he's, a bit of a weaker opponent, it's possible. I mean, he shouldn't have bluffs in his range, but sometimes you see him do weird things. So it would be, if he did bet big on this river, it would very much look like a flush or a bluff. I wouldn't expect him to have an ace. Even though, bluffs, it's difficult. A normal player just won't have a bluff here, but maybe he has something weird. With this 50-cent bet, though, I think he has, I don't even think he has 2 pair. But it's certainly possible for him to have 2 pair. Certainly looks like maybe an ace trying to go for some thin value. I mean, again, it doesn't make sense for him to do this with anything really at all. So I'm not 100% sure what he has, but basically I don't think it's a flush. I have everything but a flush beat, so I decided to raise for value. I would have been a raise fold. Maybe if he clicked it back, I'd feel kind of obligated to call the extra 250 or whatever. But certainly if he made a reasonable 3-bet, I would have folded. Given how weird the whole line was, the whole hand was, raise flop, check turn, raise river, I guess I would be in a bit of, maybe I would have induced something. Maybe the 3-bet could have been a bluff. Players sometimes spaz out like that, but I wasn't all that concerned about it. I thought my hand was just too strong to just call that river bet. And, it was. Obviously, it's a straight. When your opponent basically min bets for river, he's not gonna have a straight beat. Okay, and the pocket freeze hand, this might be the last hand I talk about, because this was a very interesting hand, where I kind of spaz out on the turn, or whatever. Obviously 6-4-4 flop, definitely a flop I want to bet. When your opponent calls here, his range of hands is basically going to be just a lot of middle pocket pairs. He's going to have 5s through 10s right around there very often. Occasionally he may float with a good ace high. An ace king or an ace queen, but I'm not quite sure how often ace king's in his range. Obviously, I'm at this point I've been playing very tight, so I guess I am a tight under the gun raiser, and he's a tight player himself. So there's some chance he'll flat call with ace king. Same thing can be said, I guess, about jacks or possibly queens. I didn't quite think so at the time, but it certainly makes sense. So this is the type of board I do want to bet, even though for the most part I'm folding out worse hands. I'm folding out maybe ace highs. He could just fold with an ace high on this flop. Certainly like an ace jack or ace 10 is going to be a bit more likely to fold. Folding out king queens or whatever and then getting called by the pocket pairs. But by betting this flop, I'm able to represent stronger hands on later streets. If I check this flop, all of a sudden I'm just not credibly representing a big overpair. So I can't possibly barrel him off both 7s on like an ace or a king turn. And also, I'm just giving free equity to his king queen suited or whatever. So both good reasons to go ahead and bet this flop. And I do. It's pretty standard so far. He calls. So I think at this point his range is pretty solidly, like I said, 7s through 10s for the most part. Clearly also 5s are possible. You can, it's not impossible for him to have 6s full or quad 4s or something like that, but obviously they're extremely unlikely. And given how fast he called, I didn't quite factor that in at the time, but now looking back, I doubt he would call that fast with quads. He would probably consider his options. So he does call, and on the jack turn, I didn't think it was a high enough card to really barrel him off. Obviously, it's a reasonable barrel card, given the range I put him on. I think he could have jacks full here, but for the most part, I think he's got a pocket pair under the jack, probably above the six. I didn't think it was, a good enough scare card. I think pocket eights might get stubborn and call again because I don't have all that many jacks in my range. So basically, at this point, my thought process was just to check and give up. But then I changed my plan. Well, after I checked. So I check, and I really did expect those middle pocket pairs to check behind them his turn here. So when he did bet the turn, I thought it was very likely that he was betting with them, especially the bet sizing as well, betting 250. It just looked a lot to me like a protection bet with a middle pocket pair. He's got two eights. He doesn't want to see an ace, a king, or a queen come off because, well, when I check fold this turn, I pretty often have ace king or ace queen or maybe king queen or whatever, or certainly at least an overcard. Um, so it looked like he was trying to protect that hand, and I decided to check raise and turn my hand into a bluff. So the positive parts of this play are that even though I have a pocket pair, I do know, exactly what I'm trying to fold out, and that's fives, sevens, eights, nines, tens. Maybe if he has 6-5, which he's doing, the same sort of protection play with. So I am theoretically possibly able to fold out these better hands. The negative part about this play is I'm not representing all that much. I mean, it's if my opponent was looser and I expect he's floating a lot more often, then yeah, all of a sudden I might be check raising this turn with like pocket queens, kings, or aces a lot more often, or certainly full house, maybe even ace jack. Just given that my opponent could just be stone cold floating, the only way I'm going to get more money out of a float is to check, and at that point, I would obviously have the option of check calling down or check raising to get more money in the pot. Um, it would at least make sense for me to check raise. But against a tighter opponent, it doesn't make much sense for me to check raise here if I flop sixes full or jacks full. I didn't quite think that at the time because it is a line I'll take on occasion, but honestly, I really wouldn't take it against this opponent all that much at all. So even though I guess I want to say it's in my repertoire, it's not so much in it against him. I think was the problem with this check raise, and it's not the only reason it didn't go wrong. My opponent just had a very strong hand, but it's part of the reason why the check raise went wrong is that I really wasn't representing all that much. I just kind of was thinking on too low of a level. Basically, I was thinking, well, he probably has sevens, and if I raise, he'll probably get scared and fold him. I'm not sure if that's right or not, because he didn't have sevens. So, there is definitely a thought process here. Maybe it was a bit incomplete. Maybe it was a bit too low level, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe he does bet fold sevens here. There's a chance this actually was a very good check raise, but he has a much stronger hand than sevens. So I pull the trigger on the check raise. Just quickly, I'll say over on. We'll get back to these pocket freeze hands. Over on table 2, I just flat called with the ace queen because there's such a tight opponent. And I would say on this board, if he's going to check fold this board if he doesn't have some sort of piece. So I'm very much done with this ace queen. Check raise breeze here, and we'll let it keep going. Thanks for a while, I guess. I didn't quite remember that. And I wanted to pause it before I hit the river. But yeah, he thinks for a while and calls. So at this point, this was actually a relatively tough river decision. When he does bet call that turn, if you remember, at the time, I didn't really think he had any overpairs in his range. Like I said, queens make a bit of sense, but kings or aces are going to pre-bet pre-flop, and the reason why I said queens make some sense, I am a tight under the gun raiser. Remember, I'm running at 9-9 here, as I told you guys about my HUD. And he's 17-13, he's a tight player himself. It's pretty common for in these positions for an opponent not to free bet a hand like ace, queen, or kings. I'm sorry, ace, king, or queens. Or, well, I mean ace, king, or queens. So, he, has one overpair in his range, possibly. He should be calling the turn if he happened to have made a full house. The reason why I'm not all that concerned about it, I mean, he's got to have particularly jacks to have a full house. Jacks make a lot of sense, unfortunately. As far as, I don't think they're really going to free bet pre-flop in these positions. Certainly going to call the flop. Certainly going to bet the turn. But, I guess I figured, like I said, I thought his bet sizing on the turn would be a bit bigger with a full house. Was one reason why I still decided to jam this river, and the other reason was I thought my line was very much full of shit. So, because of how bluffy I looked, I decided that even though, if my opponent has a full house on the turn, if he has jacks or sixes full, he's gonna just call the turn. He's obviously gonna snap the river. It's not like I'm check folding here, and he's not going to bet those middle pocket pairs on the river. He's not gonna bet sevens, eights, nines, tens, on the river. He's gonna be very happy to check behind. So I'm missing too much value by jamming all in here, on a bit more often than I'd like. I'm just getting snapped called by sixes full and jacks full. Well, let's be honest, I have a full house. It's to like check fold the river with a full house. You need a bit of a better read than I could possibly have on this opponent. So yeah, I was a bit concerned on this river. It's somewhat thin. I'm looking to get hero called. I'm looking for him to, think I'm bluffing and call my river bet with a pair of eights or something. But he's not going to bet them on the river. He's Period. It's as simple as that. There's no reason for him to bet for river with that hand. So the only way for me to possibly get more money out of it is to bet. This is another spot I could consider betting smaller, but like I said, I'm trying to continue representing my bluff at this point. And if I'm gonna bluff, I'm not gonna bet $6 on the river as a bluff. I'm gonna stick it all in there, which I do. And obviously, well, it'll be obvious in a second. I got extremely lucky on the river. He did have the queens. I mean, I guess quickly talking about how he played the hand, and then we'll call it a video and turn this into a 2 or 3 part series or whatever. Well, obviously, like I talked about, pre-flop was certainly fine. I don't like raising the flop. I do like him betting the turn. And he did, almost more or less get me to spaz out there. I did a bit on the turn. It's a spot where, again, talking about what I said before about some opponents playing too aggressively and betting too big in spots, there's no reason for him to pre-bet the turn there. He has the best hand a lot, but he does want me to maybe do something silly like jam the river with freeze when I didn't happen to get extremely lucky and hit a full house. So that's another spot where on the turn it makes a lot of sense for him to call off his hand. On the river, I'm probably not actually continuing with my bluff on the river, and the hearts did come in. If I did check his return the heart draw, all of a sudden he's beat again. So I think it was a bit optimistic of my opponent to think that I was gonna pull such a huge bluff. But having said that, I did make a pretty big bluff on the turn. So very reasonable for him to play the hand like that. For the most part, however, I would say at these stakes, you don't want to make call downs like that. Most players aren't tricky and aggressive enough to really be bluffing in that spot often enough to want to be calling with queens. Queens is a bluff catcher. Well, and like I'm saying, the reason why I don't hate his play at all because my line looks like a bluff. The reason I said jam a river was to look like a bluff. I was bluffing on the turn. It was at a certain point of the hand a bluff. So not too bad on the earlier streets, but big river all-in shove bluffs. Very few opponents are really capable of that. Obviously, if you see some sort of a maniac running at 75, 70, go ahead and call his big river bet with top pair or whatever. But when you see a normal 20, 16, you should probably be folding an overpair in a spot like that. But certainly not going to berate the play. He had an overpair. And like I said, I was bluffing on the turn, so his read was right for a little while. And I just got extremely lucky. So just kind of giving my general thoughts there as far as, calling shoves on the river with overpairs, generally speaking, too thin. For the most part, your opponents are going to have something better, but, no big deal in that spot. Like I said, I think I've been going here for about 50 minutes or so I will stop talking here and call this part 1. I'll make at least one more video out of the rest of the session, but like I said earlier, later on in the session it gets a bit slow, so I'm not sure if I'll use all of the footage, but I certainly have plenty of footage left to talk about, and there are a few more interesting spots. Like I said, we'll continue that dynamic on table 4 with looks like all in, or whatever his name is, where I spew a bit against him as well. And like I said, also I played a bit more aggressively from late position. Didn't see too many examples of that. Opening a 9-10 on the button isn't exactly all that aggressive, but I think I got just a bit more out of line in a few other spots. So we could take a look for that as well. So as always, feel free to leave some feedback and comments in the thread. And again, this is Neil Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com.